all 8 candidates. In fact, the Conservative Party were invited to this meeting repeatedly. They haven't turned up. The 3 other candidates who make up the full quota are Keith Garrett from Rebooting Democracy, and I believe he's in the room.
Okay.
And there's a statement of his on the table which you can pick up. There's Miles Hurley, he's calling himself an independent, and he's got a statement there. And Jane Robbins from the Social Democratic Party. I don't know whether Jane is in the room. No, it doesn't look like it. Okay, so, and lastly, thank you for turning up, because without you, this is nothing. It's all about your opportunity, your chance to quiz these candidates. So I spent my whole life writing about business, the environment and politics. Did a lot for 20 years for The Guardian until 3 years ago when I left. We did a huge campaign just before I left called Keep It in the Ground. I don't know whether any of you were aware of it. We had about 20 journalists who worked on that project for 3 months. And you know, to be brutally honest, in the end, it was like throwing a huge boulder on top of the ice. It made some cracks, but it didn't break the ice. But the last 18 months, I have seen more movement, more enthusiasm, more debate, and more fear generated inside this absolutely key issue. It's partly caused by the kind of things we've seen in the atmosphere, the fires in Alaska, the ice caps melting, floods in Yorkshire, and even our dear old Cam sort of drying up, the sources of the Cam drying up. All of that has really been very important. Greta Thunberg, very, very important. Cambridge school students on strike, very, very important. David Attenborough, yes, important. But ultimately, I think Extinction Rebellion have got to take a lot of the credit. Created a manifesto and an ethos that has support from the young, the old, across genders and across class barriers. A friend of mine was in London the other night with his father, who's 92, and he's in a wheelchair. My friend was pushing him around. He was at the Samuel Pepys annual black tie dinner at the London Guildhall. Very, very posh. And at the end of it, they were the last out because he was helping with his wheelchair. But the secretary of the society helped them out. And as she turned away, she was a very, very, what do we describe, high-class, posh lady. But as she turned her back on them, in her beautiful black wool coat, there was an enormous XR sticker on her. And that, to me, says it all. It has really managed to break through all the sort of cliches of the past, that the climate was only of interest to middle-class people who had nothing better to do or ate porridge all day and things like this. So the willingness of people to put themselves on the line, whether it's taking hunger strikes or actually taking over parts of London, threatening themselves with arrest. A friend of mine is facing 3 different court actions over this. These people are enormously brave. We owe them an enormous amount. And I'll just end by saying the key thing here is that Parliament has been sidelined by Extinction Rebellion and the debate around it, and we really need politicians to step up to the mark. Instead of following, they need to lead. And so I think these candidates here, I'm hoping to hear, and I'm sure you are, that they're going to lead this debate, they're not going to follow it. So that's my little spiel, just to tell you how we're going to do it. First of all, we're going to have a statement of 5 minutes from each of the candidates. Then we're going to take questions from the floor, and a few people have already sent questions in to me, which I can read out. So we'll start with 5 minutes from Peter, please.
Hello, I'm Peter Dawe. I hope to myself as the Cambridge superhero and complete with cloak. And I hope to convince you that I deserve that title, and more important, I deserve your vote. I wrote a book in 2000, published in 2008, The New Noah, predicting precisely what you are campaigning for. And I must say, Extinction Rebellion has achieved more in a year than the Green Party did in the 20 years before. So, well done. Before I stood for election, I publicly vowed I would never fly again. How many people in the audience are willing to put their hands up and say they will never fly again? Well, that's the biggest number I've ever seen. It's still not enough. I didn't look at the table, so but you saw. I have an electric car. I pretty much opted out of the consumer treadmill. I'm 100% carbon neutral. Now that's not a big boast because I own a large farm with lots of woodland, so it's fortunate. No trees have been killed in my campaign. It's a 100% digital campaign. That hasn't actually started yet. You'll start to see me. You'll start to see me on your phones shortly. But more importantly, I've been offering solutions to these problems, not just platitudes. Outside, you saw the City Pod, which I believe is the replacement for the car in the urban environment. Instead of going around in a ton of steel and half a ton of battery, you can go around in as much comfort and fast in a 25 kilo plastic wheelie bin, for want of a better word. It's safe, it's comfortable, it's fast. Every road in Cambridge becomes a 3-lane dual carriageway. Imagine your time to work in there. Bear in mind it took me 40 minutes to get from Milton Road Interchange to here at 5:30. One of the issues that I have about the position we're in is, my understanding is that some members of Extinction Rebellion are talking about a sustainable human population of 1 billion. As a result of this book, I sponsored the Anglo-Ruskin to do a global economic model of food, water, energy, capital and demographics. And if you vote for me, I can raise that to 3 billion. That's not a great answer, but it's better than 1. But in order to do it, we've got to completely change society. Things that people won't talk about here is that consumerism has got to go. Forget about tourism. You might get a grand tour once in your lifetime. That's all the planet can afford. And you've got to start working towards a sustainable world now. Not in 6 months' time, not in a year's time. Things I've been doing over the last few years. Sea level rise is threatening 60% of the UK's food production, otherwise known as the Lincolnshire and Cambridgeshire Fens. For 20 years, I've been campaigning to build a barrier from Hunstanton to Skegness to give us another 50 to 100 years. And just maybe we might have reversed things there.
So you're going to have to wrap up.
Right, okay. The worst thing is, I actually don't believe these people. I think they will fail. I think we will fail. And that is why I'm building a self-sustaining ark up in Norfolk. If you vote for me, if you get this clear, catastrophic voice heard in Westminster, we just might be able to save some more lives. Vote for me. Vote for a superhero, not a politician. Thank you.
Yes, please.
So we face... I don't think it's on actually. Is it on? Yeah, this is now. So we face two once-in-a-lifetime challenges. Brexit, which for me will be life-changing, and climate change, which I'm sure we'll all agree will be life-threatening unless we act now. And stopping Brexit is an absolute must, because if we don't, the challenge of tackling climate change will be far greater. 80% of our environmental laws here in the UK are set by Europe. And we see that crisis locally. We see it in the water that we actually drink, and it's running out. The chalk streams that provide that supply to Cambridge are being pumped dry. So we need a radical action plan. And that action plan needs to be transformative at a world level, international level, at a national level, at a local level, and for each of us as individuals. And as your MP, I will not only be your voice, but I will lead on taking action at all those levels to make sure that that plan is put in place. So internationally, what does that mean? It means stopping Brexit so we remain at the heart of the EU, so that we work with our international colleagues to tackle the emergency together on a coordinated basis. And what does it mean nationally? Well, for me it means implementing a clear Liberal Democrat action plan, investing in renewables, making sure that 100% of the electricity that we use by 2030 comes from sustainables. We will ban fracking for good. We will invest on insulating every home in the country. That's 30 million homes by 2030. Reducing the cost of energy, stopping fuel poverty, and putting money back into people's pockets. We will make sure that the countryside and nature are protected, reversing that biodiversity loss and committing to 60 million trees being planted each year. And finally, we will invest in massive sustainable public transport, electrifying the railways across Britain and ensuring that all cars are electric by 2030. So how will we fund it? We will fund it with a new Green Deal, 100 billion of borrowing a year for 10 years. But it's not just at the national level. I believe Cambridge has ambition. The number of people here this evening illustrates that. We should set the bar high. We should be the greenest city in the UK. The greenest city in the UK. We have those values, we have that vision, we want that hope, not just for Cambridge but for the country. So how would we deliver that greenest city in the UK? 3 ways. We need to speed up the investment in sustainable public transport locally. We've been sitting on our hands for far too long. We need tram, light rail, electric buses, investment in cycling, getting people out of cars, reducing congestion, improving air quality. We need to make sure that any new homes are built at the highest sustainable standards, reducing the use of water, reducing the use of energy. And most of all, I would propose we create a climate commission for Cambridge, bringing all those stakeholders together, making sure we utilise some of the best minds in the world to tackle the problem here in the city, to make sure that we achieve the goal of being the greenest city in the UK. But it's not just about the city, it's about the individual as well. I'm sure 15 years ago, none of us were true climate saints. We're all on a journey of sustainability. I know I am. I try to live a sustainable life. I try to cycle. I have an electric car. I know I can do better. And I know you're demanding that we all do better, but we need to bring the public with us. We need to bring the people of the country and the people of the world with us. And that task will be made much greater if we're out of the EU, if we pull that drawbridge up. A Conservative Brexit or a Jeremy Corbyn Labour Brexit will do nothing for the environment. It won't help us tackle climate change.
Rod, can you run that?
Sure. We have a choice. It's in the interests of us, our children and future generations that we stop Brexit and tackle the climate crisis now. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you, Terry. Can I first of all start by thanking the people who have organised this, and big thanks to Extinction Rebellion in general. What you and the young people... Sorry.
It's very stuffy, there's no air. Maybe somebody can open the door or switch something on, because it's really
Indeed, we need to tackle the air quality issues in this room. I was just in the midst of thanking Extinction Rebellion because you have transformed the political debate in this country with the young people. It has been absolutely inspiring. And what I wanted to do just first of all say, I think the key issue that you've raised is you've challenged people to tell the truth about what's going on. Tell the truth. And I believe if people hear the truth, then actually an awful lot follows from that. Because this is a massive challenge for all of us to face the reality of the urgency, the need to change, when so many people in the country, they may be kind of beginning to wake up to it, but have they really woken up to the scale of change we need in this country? And what's exciting for me about this election, I think this is a time, probably the first time in my lifetime, when we're really discussing some of those things. Now, I've had the privilege of representing this city for 4.5 years, so in some ways I'm in a different position from other colleagues on the panel. You can look at my record. It's a record which I think on these issues is credible. I've always been a red-green politician. I and my partner ran a horticultural nursery in Norfolk many years ago, and we called it the Red and Green Nurseries. I'm not sure it was the best business plan, because when people asked us was it about the colour of the front door, I actually said red for the politics and green for the plants. And that doesn't always sell us more plants, I tell you. But it's always been there for me. I've always thought the two go together. It's about a just transition. It's about not just wealthy people who can afford electric cars. It's actually about making it possible for ordinary people who are struggling with their lives, not be punished for what they do, but actually make it possible for them to be able to change their lives. So in Parliament, I've been pressing on a whole range of issues. I'm part of a range of all-party groups. I work closely with Caroline Lucas on the all-party climate change group. There's a whole series of things we do there. I've led a series of debates just recently on the Amazon forests, the burning Amazon forests, on rewilding nature. In the House itself, on the very last day, I was challenging Zach Goldsmith, who's the Environment Minister, on why hasn't the government actually banned the burning of peat bogs, which he's been talking about for ages. But of course, the most inspiring moment was when Jeremy Corbyn challenged the government to actually recognise there's a climate emergency. It was Jeremy who got that through the House of Commons. But I'm sad that the Conservative isn't here to actually explain why they've done so little since. Because frankly, it's all been talk. No action whatsoever in that period of time. I've also been on the Transport Select Committee, and throughout that time I've pressed particularly on active travel issues, on cycling, on walking, challenging the government all the time on air quality issues. And of course, on actually bringing our railway system back into public ownership, which would change what those rail companies are doing and actually making a service for passengers, not profit-making for customers, a completely different approach to our economy. One thing I can tell you tonight, which I think has been achieved now, is that a lot of you will have been very unhappy about the idea of building a super high expressway between Cambridge and Oxford. Well, I've been campaigning on this for months and months and months, years now, and I'm delighted to say that I got a written statement from the Shadow Secretary of State, Andy McDonald, last night, saying that Labour will scrap that expressway when we come to power, and I think that is really good news. The environment in terms of local campaigns, I've been delighted to support the work that's been done. I pay credit to Jeremy in particular here. That's our Jeremy rather than national Jeremy. For the work that's been done on the divestment campaign. I think the university has not moved quickly enough on this. It really needs to do more. In terms of the local protests, I've been out there with Extinction Rebellion, went out to see some people in the audience who were there in London. That was a very brave protest, and the way the law is being used against people in London is quite disgraceful, and it's got far too little publicity given what an infringement it is of our civil rights. But all of this is fine. Let me just finish on this point though. I can raise as many debates, questions and all the rest of it, but the transformational moment comes with a government that can actually do things. And for me, the great hope is that a party of government, which is the Labour Party, is actually committed to the most radical transformation we've ever seen in our lifetimes. This is a fantastically exciting moment. I've been arguing about retrofitting our inefficient houses for the best part of a decade, and always the argument was, is it done individually or is it done in a collective way? And this time we've got the answer, street by street across the country. That is how we will lift the energy efficiency of our homes. A million new green jobs, and people say, what's the economic argument? The argument actually is the green economy is the one that does best. It creates jobs. It's a no-brainer, frankly, to insulate our homes. The terrible fiasco of the coalition years, where the Liberal Democrats and Conservatives left us with the only country in Europe without a proper home insulation scheme. Absolutely right that Jeremy's prioritised that. So much to do, so many things to talk about. I'm sure it'll come up in questions, but I'll just leave you with this thought. This is a key moment. Yes, of course Brexit is important, and I will argue when asked later, it's only Labour through the people's vote that can actually stop Brexit now. Of course it's vital to maintain our environmental regulations, which will go to the wall, particularly given Johnson's latest version of the deal, which completely takes away many of the protections. Yes, Brexit's important, but the climate challenge is even more important in my view. And that is what we've got to face.
Good evening. So I'm here to tell you why it is that you have to vote Green. You have to vote Green because every Green vote is a vote to keep the climate emergency at the top of the political agenda, where XR has put it. It needs to be at the top of the agenda because the politicians we elect cannot afford to concentrate on anything else. I'm delighted by what we've heard so far from the other parties about their plans to tackle the climate emergency. I would just observe, though, that we wouldn't have been having the discussion in those terms even 2 years ago in the last election, whereas the Greens have been talking about this for decades. The Green New Deal was a term that was first put into use by Caroline Lucas in 2008. The things that are in the Green manifesto in one election appear in other people's manifestos 1 or 2 elections down the line. So we have 10 years to change absolutely everything, and business as usual isn't going to fix it for us. So we have to change the way we produce our energy and the way we grow our food. We need to change the way we travel around and the way we heat our homes. We need to change the way we work and the way we relate to the natural world around us. This will clearly take an absolutely massive effort, but doing what is necessary will in fact make life better for the vast majority of people. To address climate collapse, we need to build a fairer and a more compassionate society. We need to take dramatic and really serious steps to reduce the inequality in our society. Inequality generates alienation and dislocation, as well as fueling climate destruction. The Greens programme is focused entirely on addressing this problem. That is what distinguishes the Greens from other parties. Addressing our environmental problems is the reason that the Green Party exists, and our programme is just that thought expanded. So we propose spending £100 billion every year for 10 years on comprehensively decarbonising the economy. £100 billion for 10 years, so that's £1 trillion. It sounds like a lot of money, it is, but get this, it is still less than the amount of the money that the government made available to prop up the banks at the height of the 2009. And if our financial system is worth that much, how much more is the planet worth? And that 100 billion has only to be the start. It will take much more than that. But as new, cleaner technologies become increasingly viable, public money will catalyse private investment in a clean future as well. On top of shifting power generation entirely to renewables by 2030, we need quickly to remove the millions of pounds in subsidies that oil and gas companies currently receive. We need to move to taxing the production and the import of fossil fuels with a view to making it unviable. According to a UN report that was published just this week, the world is on track to be producing twice as much fossil fuel as is consistent with a 1.5 degree temperature rise by 2030. Companies like BP and Shell just need to be stopped in their tracks. And part of the reason we're in this mess is that our relationship with nature is out of kilter. The other species with which we share the planet are not just there for our amusement or our exploitation. We need to rewild large areas of our towns as well as our countryside, and we need to connect ourselves with nature so that we know very clearly why it is we so urgently need to transform our lifestyle and our economy. So that is why you have to vote Green. Thank you.